Hello all, welcome to this new quarterly webinar session. I'm Julien Waro. I'm in charge of the EnergyScan platform here at ENGIE Global Energy Management. So before we start, I would like to thank you for your support and your votes to the last energy risk commodity rankings. We are delighted to announce that ENGIE has been ranked first for natural gas research and second for emissions research for the second year in a row. We also integrated the ranking for cross-commodity research directly to the third place. So this is a great achievement and a strong recognition for our work and our commitment to provide you the best economic research service every day. So thanks again. And don't hesitate to give us your feedback on a regular basis to improve our service. So it's now time to introduce our speakers for today. Olivier Gagné will start this session on key trends driving financial markets with a specific focus on growing inflation risk. He will be followed by Loïc Balland for an outlook on crude oil markets. Then Évariste Gnucki will take care of European gas and LNG markets with a comment on the gray versus green gas competition outlook. And Étienne Cauvin will close the session with a focus on power and emissions market. So it's a 19-minute webinar session. So you can see the timeline here in this slide if you want to focus on a specific part of the presentation. The slides and a replay of the session will be available by tomorrow at the latest on the EnergyScan platform. Let me remind you that this is an interactive session, so don't hesitate to use the chat module to ask questions. We'll do a 10-minute Q&A session after each presentation to answer a maximum number of questions. Thanks to those who took the time to send us their questions before this webinar session. We'll also address them during the Q&A session. Finally, you will also be asked to fill a very short 30-second satisfaction survey, as usual, at the end of the session. So Olivier, the floor is yours now.
Okay, thank you, Julien. Hello, everybody. So we'll start with the macroeconomic presentation. You have seen that the title of the presentation is actually what are the consequences for financial market, but I have chosen to reverse the problem and to start from what the markets tell us. I hope you won't mind. So first, what we can see every day is that the equity markets keep on rising. That points to activity recovery, of course, on the strong expectation. Also, the hope that bond yields will remain low despite this recovery. Precisely, we have seen, this is the second graph, we have seen bond yields rising since the end of last year. Again, this is consistent with recovery expectations, and also the fact that inflation is expected to go higher. But we have seen that for the last weeks, there has been a stabilization in the bond yields, and that is consistent also with the view that this surge in inflation will remain temporary and will not trigger any preventive action from central banks. A third graph shows the evolution of the euro dollar and the parallel evolution of the spread between long-term bond yields in Germany and the US, Germany being taken as a benchmark for the euro area. You can see that first, of course, we have seen a sharp rise in the euro dollar corresponding actually to a lower US dollar and reflecting a growing risk appetite as the US dollar is a safe haven asset. But finally, the euro dollar has been caught up by the widening bond yields spread between the US and the euro area, and that reflects both the overperformance of the US economy and the underperformance on of the euro. So here are the starting points of this short presentation, and we will look at the recovery prospects with a key special focus on the spread between the US and the euro area, and also at the inflation risk that should take a bit less than 10 minutes. And after that, I will take some questions, as Julien already mentioned. So let's start with with activity on the recovery. This is mainly a US story. We have already seen a strong acceleration in Q1. Growth in the US is expected to be around plus 6% on a quarterly annualized basis. But for Q2, that should be really a strong acceleration with probably a double-digit growth that should come. The illustration is perfect here with the surge in the business confidence indices that are both at record levels for the ISM in services, and so that corresponds to the Purchasing Manager Index. And in the manufacturing sector, this is the highest level since 1983. We have seen also in March nearly 1 million job creation, and that also supports a strong rebound in consumer confidence. There is no graph here, but you can believe me. Clearly, the Joe Biden's policy has changed everything with this stimulus package of nearly $2 trillion that has been voted in March, and another one will follow with a long-term goal to boost infrastructure, especially. But there will be also it is planned to increase taxation, and that will be more difficult to accept even for some Democrats. So this long-term plan is far from being voted for now. The third graph illustrates the difference in terms of fiscal stimulus in the US and in the euro area. If you remember, the European Union was prized last year for having agreed on a very strong stimulus package. Now we have a US stimulus package that is twice bigger, and the impact in the short term will be probably 10 times bigger in the US. Sorry, I have some difficulties with my the control of the slides. Okay. Sorry for that. So you have a sum up of the global growth forecast on this table. No surprise here, but you can see again the difference between the US and Europe. US, we expect something around plus 6% on average this year for GDP growth after minus 3.5. For the euro area, we expect plus 4 after minus 7. That makes a big difference. That means the level of activity, the US should come back to the pre-pandemic level of activity as soon as Q2. For the euro area, that won't be probably before 2022. Strong growth in China, 8.3% after 2.3%. So that will also contribute strongly to the rebound in global activity. But I think the dynamics is clearly not the same in China, and in particular, the Chinese authorities have begun to stop the slippage in indebtedness in China, and you can see already the slowdown in the credit distribution, especially from non-banks. Usually this is very strongly correlated, closely correlated with the evolution of GDP growth. So even if there are big numbers in China, we rather expect slowing down of activity during the year. Also you can see that for emerging countries there should be a strong rebound, but probably it's a bit too optimistic for India given the resurgence of the pandemic. And precisely we will address a bit this problem with the following slide. This is really the main threat for the recovery. Optimism has been based on the success of vaccination campaign. We have talked a lot about Israel, the US, the UK. If you look at the evolution of the number of new cases, new COVID-19 cases, of course, you can see a sharp decline in the number of UK cases, for example, while for the other European country where vaccination has been much more problematic, of course, the recent evolution has not been favorable at all. I mean, emerging countries, as I just told you, you have still very high number of cases in Latin America in general, Brazil in particular, on the sharp resurgence of the number of cases in India that just triggered first decision to close some regions where the resurgence is particularly strong. What is probably more interesting is the evolution of the US number of new cases, because in the US, we have really a successful vaccination campaign, but you can see that the number of new cases has remained rather high and is even reaccelerating with some big problems in states like Michigan, for example, where the situation is very serious again. So that shows that so far, despite this focus on vaccination, the most efficient measure remains lockdown. And in particular, we have seen that the closure of schools has been extremely important to limit the spread of the pandemic. And of course, we have seen also that if lockdown measures have gradually been eased because people are, have adapted themselves to the new situation, when you close schools, has immediately a negative impact on activity. So all in all, I would say the pandemic remains a big threat for recovery, and there is also the question of vaccines, and we have an illustration of this with the problem of Johnson & Johnson that has, after the decision of the US Health Authority to review some cases comparable to side effects of AstraZeneca, Johnson has decided to postpone the distribution of its vaccine in Europe, and that it's bad news for Europe because Europe is expected to accelerate strongly the vaccination pace in Q2, as you can see on the second graph. So if you have Johnson & Johnson not there, and potentially some problems on AstraZeneca as well, that could reduce strongly the pace of acceleration of vaccination in Europe. The last point I would like to address is the question of inflation. Sorry, it's a bit difficult to have the control of the slides. So the last thing is about inflation. The last question. I will be short because we can have probably some talks more in depth during the Q&A session. The main risk clearly lies in the US with a strong acceleration of activity. You have an illustration of the fact that it's already the case with the evolution of PPI prices, import prices in the US, CPI. We had CPI figures yesterday. They were above expectations, but the market reaction was very, very soft. actually. So that means that markets and central banks, they expect this acceleration to be temporary, to be mainly based on the fact that energy prices, on a huge basis effect on energy prices, will push inflation higher. But they expect, both markets and central banks, that core inflation will not accelerate or will just moderately accelerate, and so that there will be no sharp increase in wages in particular. There is a second reason for tensions on prices that comes from bottlenecks, on the fact that there are some problems of supply that came after the pandemic, and also the fact that in front of constraints on supply, you have an enormous pent-up demand that will be freed suddenly, so you can expect probably some tensions in some sectors on prices. But again, the main factor that should limit the rise in inflation is the state of the job market. I show you that we have seen nearly 1 million job creation in March, but if you look at this graph that shows the evolution of the employment in the non-farm sector in the US, you can see that there are still about 10 million jobs missing. So of course, the reasoning is to say that in this situation, you cannot have any upward pressure on wages, and you can have a kind of wage price loop that could reappear. That is probably debatable, because you can also think that this crisis has sent probably many people out of the job market, and they won't be able to come back. I mean, for many reasons, and probably you can expect that in some sectors there will be some tension. So it's still debatable. Nobody has really the answer, but this is a key, clearly a key problem for the coming months for markets. And you have to check that will inflation pressures remain temporary? We know that inflation will be higher, or will they be durable? But I think that, Julien, that we can maybe have a look at some questions maybe about inflation. We don't hear you. Okay.
You can hear me? Yeah. Yeah. As you said, inflation is a growing risk. We've seen a lot of news about that. But is it only a US situation?
It's mainly a US problem, yeah. I mean, of course, if you consider Europe, we will have the same evolution of inflation in the short term due to energy prices. That is to say that inflation will accelerate. It has already been the case in the euro area in March, but that will continue in April, in May, and probably in June as well. But again, it's difficult to imagine that, given the situation of the labor market in Europe, we have I mean, if you don't have any wage price loop taking place in the US, that won't be the case in Europe. That's for sure. Today this is mainly a US problem. Yes.
But are there any structural factors that can push inflation higher overall?
Yeah, clearly, this is also one source of discussion among economists and on the financial market. The fact that, for example, the crisis could lead to some form of deglobalization. Meaning that many advanced countries in particular will want to take the control of some productions. I mean, not only regarding the health sectors. We have seen that some governments already want to bring back production in their country, and of course that could diminish the downward pressures coming from emerging countries, China in particular, on the global level of prices. The second factor, a second structural factor, could be the demography, with older people taking the I would say the lead in the population, and you have a reduced number of people available for work, and that could also fuel some upward pressure on the cost of labor. But these are more long-term problems that are probably out of the scope of markets right now. If you look, for example, at inflation expectations, the main measure is a 5-year. In 5 year, in the US right now, it's around 2.2, 2.3%. So that means markets are not really worried about the fact that inflation could really top 2% in the future.
And what is the role of central banks in this context?
Of course, this is the amount of liquidity. The amount of liquidity has been enormous since the financial crisis. So for the last decade, and that continues. You have seen that because central banks have made massive purchases of bonds to finance the growing public deficits. The fact is that for the time being, it has inflated assets. Actually, I mean, whether you look at the evolution of the real estate market or the evolution of the stock market, but we haven't seen really an impact on prices of goods or services. So, of course, there are many people who think that that could be a threat in the future, on that. One of the only solution to reimburse the enormous amount of debt that has been created, that could be to have higher inflation. But that could also be higher taxes. And we see that with a key change in the US with the Biden program. Mr. Biden plans to increase the taxation for the big corporation in the US for the first time since the first term of Mr. Clinton, so 25 years ago. This is a big change, and he plans also to increase the level of taxation on the wealthy. If the US is able to do that, you can imagine easily that that will be a trend that will be closely looked at in Europe.
Okay, thank you, Olivier, for these precisions. So it's time to move on to the oil market part with Loïc Balland. Loïc, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'll start with what happened over the last month. So we saw quite a significant decline in crude prices globally. And this has mainly to do with three forces that affected the market and will likely shape the market for the next months or so. So as you see, we lost about $6 to $7 a barrel at the front of the curve in the spot market. This has been mainly due to the rise of Iranian crude exports that were unexpected before. And the fact that they were in a way smuggled to China at a steep discount to other crude. So this has created some sort of unfair competition in regards to other crudes. The second force was that the demand recovery was postponed in Europe, India, and other developing economies. And this, of course, has a huge effect on expected demand over the course of 2021. And these forces overall led to a collapse in financial positioning in the crude market. And that's what really created this sharp downturn. And I'll try to explain those three forces, how they interact and how they ultimately yielded the current outcome. So first of all, what we can see is that over the last months, the crude market, the physical crude market, has weakened significantly. This is mainly due to refineries in China being in maintenance. And we saw that March imports were slightly down, not hugely down, but slightly. But the other really sharp change was that the base supply for China was slightly replaced by Iranian crude, which is about 1 to 1.2 million barrels per day in March and April. It is, of course, estimated because this Iranian crude is actually smuggled through various schemes. One is to use other vessels. So there's various ways to hide Iranian crude, but this could not be ignored by the market anymore, given the large amount that it represented. The second thing that it has created is that China pulled back from the crude markets to get their incremental crude. And so we saw that, for example, North Sea crude weakened significantly, African crudes also. And so it created a general pullback in crude demand at the front. This created a drop in what we call the crude market structure. So if we look at the first chart, this is the time spread for crude oil. It kind of tells you how wanted the crude is currently compared to future dates. And we saw that it briefly went into contango, meaning that the front of the curve is below the back of the curve. And this has quite significant implications for market participants, but especially financial players. So usually what financial players seek when they want to get exposure to commodity markets is that they want to hold what they call a time spread. And this time spread yields a return. This return is particularly interesting for investors because it's usually quite uncorrelated with other revenue stream like equities or bond markets. The issue here is that if the backwardation, meaning that the front is more valued than the back of the curve, if backwardation is lost, you lose all returns. And so that's what happens and has taken investor by surprise. And we saw a decline in the long exposure of what the CTFC called managed money, which is financial flows to the Brent market, for example. And we can pretty much see that once that happened, open interest continued to decline sharply, as you can see on the second graph. And flat price, of course, was hugely dented by this pullback in investor price pressure. Looking ahead, this was acknowledged by the OPEC Plus group, but OPEC Plus is more focused on the physical and the prospective side of things, and they still decided to move forward and to bring back 1.2 million barrels per day over Q2 21. This has, in our opinion, delayed the normalization of crude stocks and the forward cover, which is crude stock divided by the demand, by about a month, meaning that we see the full and complete normalization of the crude market rather towards October, mid-October. However, in that scenario, we still have robust demand growth over Q2 and Q3. And I'm going to show you the first signs of this recovery of the demand. So if we look at the US and we look at high frequency indicators, we already starting to see jet demand recovering. And if we look at the passenger checked by the TSA, for example, there's been recently quite a significant uptick in flights, passenger, and so jet demand will likely rise to 1.6 million barrels per day to 1.7 in the US in the coming month. And this is quite significant because refiners must otherwise, if nobody wants jet fuel, they have to put that part of the barrel into the diesel pool, and the diesel pool can't absorb the volumes that are required. So once jet markets can absorb that extra incremental demand, it will naturally flow to the crude market because refiners will be able to increase their crude throughputs. The other thing is that gasoline demand in the US is likely to be particularly strong this summer, likely above 9 million barrels per day. We already see that the traffic reported by high frequency indicators is already almost back to summer levels, as you can see on the second chart. And we anticipate, of course, gasoline demand to be extremely strong as international travel is still quite affected by the pandemic globally. And it forces Americans to travel domestically, whether it's by plane or by road. Looking at other parts of the globe, we have a more choppy recovery. So if you look at the EU, we can clearly see that there's a downward sloping pattern when the EU lockdowns were implemented back in late March, early April. EU refining runs were at 8.4 million barrels per day in March. That's also extremely low, and that's likely to be sustained for the months to come. Indian demand is also quite concerning, as Olivier mentioned, with the health situation in India being particularly problematic. We still see that India will likely outperform in Q3, although maybe in Q2 we'll see a slight pullback in product demand. Yet, if we account for all these kind of downside risks, we still see significant drawdowns starting in Q2 and Q3, which means that it will allow OPEC members to smoothly pull back spare capacity that they hold and flow and continue to balance the market in a relatively smooth manner. So that's why we have prices gently moving upward over the course of 2021 and 2022. We think that the current prices are maybe a bit more reflective of the price outlook than the futures price. As you can see, there's quite a bit of divergence between futures prices and our forecast. And so that's our main view is that we believe there's value to be long-dated futures. And we also believe that gasoline will be one of the strongest participants in the oil complex, meaning that gasoline cracks will continue to be valued quite highly. So yeah, we maintain a $60 to $65 a barrel range over the short term, and then moving gently to 65 to 70 post Q3 2021. Maybe I can take a few questions.
Yes, thank you, Loic. We have some questions for you. First one about Iran. So, does the Iranian crude oil export rise demonstrates the inefficiency of the US embargo? Where is this crude oil exported to?
So that's a great question. So it is, I'd say, almost the entire crude exports goes to China. There's not a lot of countries that are ready to risk being sanctioned by the US. Even if, as we saw, the US sanctions at the moment for looking at Iran are quite mild because the Biden administration is seeking the re-implementation of the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal. And so they're trying to have a more moderate stance on export, on sanctions, quite opposed to the Trump administration. As soon as we see progress in the JCPOA agreement, it's likely that many other countries will try to get more crude from the Iranian producers. This crude is quite heavy and sour crude, so it's quite adapted to Korean refineries and Japanese refineries. So it's likely to be quite wanted by Asian customers. But so far, yeah, it's quite inefficient, but it's still holding a lot of oil importers back, the level of sanctions.
Okay. Another question for you, Loic. So you said in your outlook that you are expecting crude oil Brent prices to remain in the $60 to $65 range in the short term. But will Brent oil rise towards $60 to $75, not trigger an increase in the US WTI, as we have seen often?
Well, yeah, those two prices are quite correlated usually. It's within a range of the US WTI is at a discount of $4 to $5 barrel, 3 when it's when the US situation is a bit more tense. I agree that over 70 and 75, we will start to see a reaction from various oil importers, whether it's India or China, to maybe look for cheaper alternatives like running down stocks or trying to be more cognizant of oil consumption and so on. But what we see also is that a lot of countries are, when prices are rising, they may also cut tax on petrol prices. That's what happened in Brazil recently. That could also be an option for India, and so this doesn't really affect global crude prices. On the contrary, it's kind of a demand boost. So the demand reaction from countries, demand response, could be muted by countries voluntarily reducing petrol duties. Yeah.
Okay. One last question, looking at the forward curve. So will OPEC succeed in keeping the forward curve in backwardation in order to keep US shale producers away from long-term hedging?
That's a very good question. Backwardation is one of the main objective of OPEC, and so far they've taken one of the strongest stance or strategy to try to maintain that backwardation. So they're really they are holding back on their spare capacity, on their supplies, to create and then inventory draws. At this stage, they're taking one of the strongest stance to really maintain backwardation. US shale producers are known to use long-term hedging a lot because that's a way to finance their capital costs. However, they worked under various market situations that are sometimes more adverse than the current one. So I don't think that they will be extremely limited by the current backwardation. I think that the long-term price level at the moment, which is around 50 to 55, I believe, for the long-dated futures, is quite good for the US producers. And I think that past this 2021 year of kind of focused on cash flow. They will focus more on growth post 2021 and then 2022. So I still think that there's a potential for the US to grow their resource and their output, but it will be delayed in 2022 and maybe 2023.
Okay, so one very last question, if you can answer that.
Sure.
It's 30 seconds, but it's quite interesting to conclude on this. Will the number of US rigs increase if crude oil remains around $65 per barrel?
So yeah, that would be one of the thing we expect. There's another factor to take into account is kind of once a rig is has been exploited, it comes into what we call the DUC, drilled uncompleted wells, which is kind of a backlog of already drilled area. And this backlog is still quite significant. It's kind of a heritage from 2019 and 2018, when the US upstream companies were drilling extremely hard. And so we could see a slight disconnect over the course of the next months, because they're still running down on a huge backlog of drilled uncompleted wells. But at some point, if all remains at that level, most definitely there will be a ramp up in US rigs. They have shown their resilience over the years, and I'm confident that they will continue to increase outputs in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thanks a lot, Loic, for this conversation.
Thank you.
So let's go back to the presentation with Évariste for natural gas markets.
Thank you, Julien. Good morning, everybody. So let's start this section on natural gas with the trend in demand. On the residential sector, demand was rather volatile since the start of the year, with the specific surge in the first half of Feb. You can see it on the graph on the left. Strong increase in residential gas demand due to the sharp drop in temperatures. But afterwards, in the second half of Feb, demand dropped quite significantly. In March, it increased, but remained rather volatile. On demand for power generation, the trend was more clearly up, as you can see it on the table, the first table, which is on the right. If you take our panel of 6 countries, demand was up in Jan-Feb, and also in March, particularly in March, with a 20% increase. In this table, it is also interesting to highlight the specific case of Spain. Unlike the other countries where demand was up, if you take Spain, demand is significantly on the downside since the start of the year. We believe that this is due to what is happening in Spain with the surge in renewable generation, solar and wind. It is also important to note that coal generation is strong as well in the second table, as you can see it. Of course, this is mainly for Germany, because as you can see it on the table, coal is almost it is completely disappearing in other countries, but it is still resilient in Germany. And even for coal generation, we are seeing strong levels compared to last year. Let's now move to the supply side. Starting with the flows from Russia, they rebounded in March. You see it on the graph, which is in the middle, reaching level close to last year and significantly up month on month. However, since the 9th of April, we are seeing some problems on the Yamal flows due to a technical outage. Flows drop quite significantly, and if you take total Russian flows, you are missing around 9% of the flows, but they are expected to recover from today. So have to follow closely what will happen on Russian flows in the very short term. On the Norwegian flows, due to a series of planned and unplanned outages, export was rather limited in March, although they rebound a little. But more important is the situation right now. It flows significantly down since 8th of April due to planned maintenance works. So right now we are missing around 13% in Norwegian flows. But the main message on this supply landscape is clearly what is happening on the LNG side, with a strong rebound in European LNG imports in March. Strong import, particularly from Qatar, of course, as the Asian market is. It means that Qatar rerouted some flows that was sent to Asia, rerouted those flows to Europe. So flows are clearly on the upside in Europe in March, and the trend continued in April so far. So flows are coming back to Europe on the LNG side, just because the LNG, the global LNG supply is much more comfortable since mid-Jan, with the sharp drop in the flows sent to Asia. As you can see, there is a seasonality as well in the Asian supply. So they are in their period of rather weak demand on energy. So those flows are coming back to Europe. Even the temporary blockage of the Suez Canal seems to have had little impact. And the easing of this market, you can clearly see it in the drop in Asia GKM prices, significantly on the downside. If you look at the graph on the right, and this is reducing the spread against European prices, which is suggesting that we can continue to have a rather comfortable LNG supply in Europe in the near future. Of course, for the spot, it's the case, but even if you take maturities up to July and August, prices are not so huge in Asia, so the spread is maintained at rather weak levels that afford Europe to take more LNG in the coming months. So the situation is improving on the LNG side, but we believe that the strong tension we saw on Asian markets from early December to mid-Jan has left its mark. And to illustrate this, I propose to look at two trends on the gas market and also on the coal market, taking the TTF as a benchmark and the API2 for Europe. And here we are looking at graph with some long-term trends as represented by the evolution on a one-year basis. And you see clearly on the two graphs that prices were on a downtrend until end November, but they rebounded significantly from mid-December. Mid-December, as a reminder, this was the crisis in Asia, of course, the crisis on the power market, spreading to the fuel market, gas and coal. And here you see that prices at that time, mid-December, they climbed above the one-year average, breaking the downtrend that was in place so far. This was a crisis of scarcity, of course, scarcity of gas and coal material. And we believe that this crisis convinced some suppliers that their product ultimately had value and they could afford to sell it at a higher price, meaning that the downtrend was over and we are now heading to a more bullish trend. And it is also interesting to see that the two markets didn't behave the same. On the coal market, you see clearly that after reaching the one-year high, prices started to drop. As a reminder, in Asia, the power generators are burning more coal than gas for their needs. If you take China, India, South Korea, and Japan, coal generation overall is much more important for Asian countries than gas generation. So the easing in Asian market at that time from mid-Jan was more seen on the coal market than on the gas market. On the gas market, prices continue to increase, particularly in Europe. On top of that, if you take the example of China, the recent rise in the coal prices raised some concern from authorities, and they decided to take some decision to push supply on the upside. For all those reasons, we are now seeing that coal prices are less bullish compared to gas prices. And on top of that, the other support for gas prices, of course, on the demand side. Because at the time LNG supply was increasing, we had some cold wave in Europe. And here again, you can see it when you look at the graph, which is on the left. The trend was clearly bearish from mid-Jan with the easing of Asian markets. So we have more LNG to Europe, so bearish pressure on prices. But in March, we have this surge in residential demand due to the sharp drop in temperature. And again here, prices break their downtrend, rising above the 20-day average. And of course, the blockage of the Suez Canal provided additional support. And more recently, we have this strong drop in temperature since the start of April. And of course, this is maintaining the uptrend. And all those elements on the spot, they had an impact on the curve, particularly on Cal 22 prices. And on top of that, these prices benefited from bullish EUA and coal prices. Looking at the stock situation, of course, this is a consequence of all the months we had with rather weak Russian flows, weak Norwegian flows, and also, at least until recently, rather weak LNG supply, while demand was more resilient, as we saw it on the residential sector, but also on the power generation sector. So meaning that at the end, if you look at the stock situation, we are at rather weak levels. On the 11th of April, stocks were full at only 30%. This is an intermediate situation between the very weak levels of 2018 and the very comfortable levels of 2020 last year and 2019. This intermediate situation, we believe that it will also lead this year to an intermediate situation in terms of pricing. We don't expect prices to be as high as the levels of 2018, as you can see it on the graph on the right, but we don't expect them also to be as low as the very weak prices of last year. So we should have a situation, an intermediate situation in between, with prices probably closer to go to those coal switching levels. And you have the levels on the graph for this summer. This level is around 21.6, and if you take calendar 2022, we are at around 22 euro per megawatt hour. So this is clearly a risk factor for gas prices for this summer, and we will see it on the next slide when you try to build a price trajectory for the TTF Cal 22. Again, take our starting point of December 2020. You see that in December, prices were rather weak in the middle of our price trajectory range, and even slightly on the downside. But unfortunately, what happened in Asia disturbed the trajectory, and prices started to increase quite significantly and finally break above the max of the trajectory. But they are now facing another resistance. We already mentioned this is the 1-year high we show here, which is around A18. This 1-year high is blocking the price increase so far. We expect it to continue to play its role of resistance, meaning that we expect that financial players, Some of them at least will start to take their profit. And this could exert a bearish pressure on prices, and prices could come back inside the range, probably not in the middle of the range, but at least on the upper part of the trading range. This is the optimistic scenario. 1 year high playing its role of resistance, profit taking by financial players, prices on the downside back inside the range. But of course, there is an alternative scenario which is much more bullish. In this scenario, the gas market remains tight, meaning that stock levels remain rather weak, and meaning that during the summer you still need to destroy demand from power generation. And for this to happen, you have to move prices closer to the coal switching levels for the summer, and also with an impact for calendar 22. And if this happens, it means that prices could rise to 22 euro per megawatt hour on a calendar basis for the calendar 2022. This is not our favorite scenario, but it is clearly a risk factor. But for you, maybe one solution to monitor clearly this position is to look at the resistance of the 1 year high. If in the coming weeks this resistance is broken, I'm afraid that the risk is clearly to see prices rising to this coal switching level. So that's it for the very short term. Now, if you look at the longer term, of course, for the longer term, you have more options for your gas sourcing. It's not only what we call now the gray gas, represented here by the TTF. You have options for more green gases. Starting with hydrogen, you can start from the three colors of hydrogen, so the gray, the blue, and the green with the electrolysis. But you have also options for biomethane. For biomethane, we do not have just one projection, but it's a range because you have a wide options for biomethane sourcing, because depending on the projects, depending on the countries, that's why we put a range. But beside that, you see clearly that the trend is downward. So we expect the cost to drop, because you have scaling up of projects, you have more optimizations on the sourcing of the fuel you are using. So overall, the trend is downward. The trend is also downward for hydrogen, particularly for electrolysis. Because if you take some assumptions, people are expecting maybe having by 2030 costs at around 60 euro per megawatt hour. On top of that, these are the costs, maybe the cost of the projects, but this is not actually what you have to pay as a user. You have a lot of subsidies depending on countries. You have the guarantees of origin. You can use also some risk management optimization to reduce the cost. So we believe that there are opportunities to reduce the cost of those projects, to bring it back to more competitive levels. And on top of that, if you look at the gray gas, here you have the TTF, you can see that the curve is a little bit backwarded. We don't believe in this backwardation, because we believe that the gas market should be tighter in the coming years, meaning that the TTF curve will be higher. And of course, you have also the EUA cost. The EUA cost, as you can see, it is already increasing clearly the cost of sourcing if you have to buy your EUA on the market, on the EUA ETS. And Etienne will come back to it later on. We believe that the EUA price has an upside potential in the coming years. For all those reasons, we believe that the additional spread you have currently between the gray and the green gas should continue to narrow. And this is for you consumers, of course, an opportunity to think about other sourcing opportunities when you have to source for maturities starting 25, 26, and 2030. On longest maturities, there are clearly some options, or the options are part of just buying the gray gas. So that's it for me, Julien. I don't know if there are some questions.
Presentation, we have some questions for you. I will start with one about short-term issues. Just a question. Okay. We see that the current level of European gas prices is relatively high. For example, the TTF May 21 contract closed at 19.50 euro per megawatt hour yesterday. And we saw in your presentation that we had record high imports of LNG into Europe in March. So this is quite surprising. What is explaining the current level at the moment?
Very good question. Of course, this is surprising because in our scenario, we hope that with the increase in LNG, we could have a drop in prices, but the supply and LNG in particular is only part of the story. When you think about supply-demand balance, you have to look at also demand. And as I mentioned during the presentation, at the time we saw this increase in LNG supply in Europe. At the same time, we have this surge in demand. So if you have higher demand coming from residential, but also higher demand coming from power generation, of course, this can offset the impact of a higher LNG supply. To me, this is the main fundamental reason. Demand, the increase in demand offset, in fact, the increase in LNG supply. And on top of that, as I mentioned, since mid-December, I have a feeling that suppliers are no longer in the same mood. So we break the downtrend, the long-term downtrend. So people believe, and in Asia, it's clearly the case, given what's happened, people are more careful about scarcity. So you believe that, okay, if you have an issue on the demand side, you can be in trouble. So this explains why you can put a risk premium on the market for those reasons.
Okay, another key question. You talked about that during your presentation, but can you just go back on the backwardation of the European gas curve at the moment? What's explaining that?
So yes, of course. First, you can explain the backwardation with the strong rise in prices, because backwardation means that calendar 22 prices increase a lot because the tightness was on the spot. So automatically, even if the back end of the curve increase, if you have a higher increase on the near curve, you automatically have a backwardation. This is the first explanation. There is a backwardation because calendar 22 prices are very high, but there could also be another explanation. Due to the strong pressure coming from renewables, and in this case, I took the example of Spain, which I believe it's an interesting case. You have automatically the feeling that in the years to come, you will need less gas-fired generation. And again, in the first slide, I show that apart from Germany, coal is almost disappearing in power generation. Gas is more resilient, except in Spain. So what is happening in Spain may be gradually also spreading to other geographies, with people believing that you don't need a lot of gas-fired generation in Europe in the coming years. So this could explain the pressure on the far curve, just because spark spread are also weaker, meaning that there is no incentive for power plants to hedge. So there is no incentive for them to buy. So this could be the second explanation for the backwardation. In the distant maturities, spark spread are dropping. Therefore, no incentive for power plants to hedge and to buy gas. But we don't believe it. We believe, and again, the specific case of Spain is interesting. Although prices are low on the distant maturities, when you move to the spot, you see that on the spot from time to time, and particularly when you don't have renewables and when it is cold, you still need gas-fired plants to run. So that's why we don't believe in this backwardation, because we believe that the European market will still need gas. And if you extend the scope, in Asia, we believe that people will still need gas. Even in Asia, they are also making their energy transition from coal to gas. And for all those reasons, we believe that the gas market can be upward.
Okay, so one last question. You are talking about gas demand from power plants in Europe. So is there much room for a demand increase from European gas plants, considering that they are already highly being utilized?
I'll say it depend on countries. And again, I invite you to look at the table we show at the start. For some countries, of course, you have some upside in Germany, in Italy, or in the UK, because for some of them you have this drop in coal-fired generation, and of course this will be replaced by gas plants. So yes, to me, there is still room for demand increase. Maybe not so much, but when you are in the summer, this can replace part of the demand coming from residential.
Okay, thank you, Évariste, for your answers. So let's go back to the presentation with Etienne for power and emission markets.
Thank you, Julien. Hello, everyone. I hope you are not too tired at this time of the webinar, because I have a lot of interesting items to show you. And so, as usual, let's start with the carbon market, for which today's objective is to describe the reasons and actors behind the recent surges of prices. So, as you can see on the left chart, the end-of-year bullish trend observed in the carbon market at the end of 2020 pushed the EUA prices up nearly by 50%, by mid-January, from when prices actually started to correct and steady, as most market participants were waiting for the auction schedule and the new supply coming to the market. So the auction restart was delayed and scheduled at the end of the month instead of earlier in the year. But instead of correcting or at least steadying early February, the EUA prices started to surge to record prices. So how can we explain this unexpected rally? And actually, there are several factors behind this sudden upward move. So the main event, and I'm sure you have all heard about it, was the publication by Bloomberg of an article stating that several major investment funds saw the carbon prices reach 100 euros per ton by the end of 2021. And what you need to know is that at the time, most analysts saw the prices average between 30 and 40 euros, to say the least, for the most optimists. Based on the fundamentals of the market and our knowledge of the policy changes considered at the time. So there was a huge discrepancy between the analyst forecast and the levels mentioned by the article. But nonetheless, the article triggered a lot of speculative buying just after its publication, and attracted a lot of new financial players, which I will present you right after. And as a consequence, all the market participants that bet on a correction in February due to the restart of the auction and the new supply after a nearly 6 week supply drought had to buy back their position because they were losing money, which is called short covering, and which provided additional support to the already bullish market. But that's not all. Actually, at the same time, we observed very cold temperatures below average across Europe, which strengthened the power demand and, of course, the thermal generation and provided additional support. And on top of that, as you can see on the right chart, we saw the equities soar early February. And as you may know, the carbon market often takes direction from the equities. And so this provided further support to the carbon prices. So from mid-February, we saw prices slightly correct, because actually the carbon market started to lose some of its support with warmer temperatures, the correcting or at least steadying equities. And we observed at that time a rising concern over the worsening COVID situation across Europe. So all of that made prices correct, and of course, profit-taking from the sharp upward move earlier the month. But instead of returning to, let's say, late January levels, the prices soared again in March. And this time, the influence of the speculators and financial players is way more clearer than early February. Because at the time, the short-term fundamentals were rather unsupportive, with mostly negative clean dark and spark spreads, but also warmer temperatures. So what happened exactly? Well, the speculators, as you can see on the right chart, took support from the soaring equities to push prices further up toward 45 euros per ton, which seems to be their target, considering the large open interest of the calls option with these strike prices. But that's not all. Indeed, you also had a slight support from the late compliance player. So far, you had several utilities or industrials that were waiting for prices to correct after the end of year bullish trend, or even the sharp surge early February, to buy their missing allowances for their 2020 emissions. So of course, you cannot use, as you may know, the phase 4 allowances, so all the allowances bought through the auction for your 2020 emissions, but you can absolutely swap them against a fee with the other financial players. And until the end of March, you could buy through a specific futures phase 3 allowances. So basically, at that time, all these late compliance players that were waiting for a correction that never occurred faced two choices. Either they waited further for a downward move that may never occur, considering the overall bullish picture of the carbon market, with all the reforms expected next June that are likely to result in a tighter supply. Or they could, and they were actually pressured to do that, buy allowances at any dip in prices to avoid buying, more expensive allowances later. And actually, on one side, the speculators took advantage of this to pressure them to buy, and which brought prices further up. And on the other hand, when prices corrected after the sharp surges, as we have seen mid-January and mid-February, well, all these late compliance players stepped in and prevented prices to return to way lower levels. Okay, so now that you have a clear view on all the factors behind these unexpected rallies, let's dive deeper into the analysis and why we think the financial players are the main responsible for the surges. And I think a good way to show you that is through the Commitment of Traders report. So this weekly report is provided by the European Securities and Market Authority, so the ESMA and the ICE, and it presents the aggregate positions held by the market participants on the ICE. But what is the most interesting aspect of this report is that it differentiates the position of the financial players, meaning the banks, the investment funds, and all the other financial institutions, from the position of the emitters. So basically all your power generators and industrial. And this provides a good indication and can be used as a proxy to spot the variations in hedging or speculative strategies and help identify the categories of participants behind several carbon prices moves. So let's focus on the bottom right chart, which is very interesting. So the outer circle represents not really the open interest, but the total number of open contracts by each category. And not surprisingly, the emitters observe one of the largest open interest because they have to buy for real compliance needs. So basically, they represent the real demand. On the other hand, in the light red, you can see a very large open interest from the banks. So it's investment firms or credit institutions, but really they are the banks. And actually, it does not mean much. In reality, it's a huge short positions because banks carry out a lot of carry trade. So carry trade is when you buy allowances on the spot market and at the same time sell on the future to lock your margin. So any change in their position actually do not give real direction to the carbon market. But the most interesting thing is that the investment funds, so basically the speculators, have a very short position overall. But when you look at the inner circle, which represents the number of persons holding a position, they represent the largest part of the market in terms of number of participants. So you have really a discrepancy in the number of people in the market and their overall position, which means that you do not overall need a large position to move the prices in one direction or the other, as we are going to see in the next slide. But before that, I think it's interesting also to look at the upper chart, which represents the evolution of the number of participants. And still in darker red, you can see the number of investment funds. And this number has grown quite significantly since mid-2020. And it actually coincides with the start of the discussions around the climate law. And it's, the slope was even sharper in 2021, we will going to see in the next slide too. And this could mean that the financial players are actually attracted by all the discussion around the climate law and the stronger climate ambitions, which are likely to push the carbon prices in one direction, which is up. And they might be attracted by that and, of course, the volatility of the carbon market. Okay, so let's see what the data showed for the last couple of months. And let's focus first on the left and middle charts, which are representing this time the net position of the emitters on the left and of the investment funds in the middle. And I think you already see quite clearly my point. So on the left, you can see that actually the emitters, so not only the late compliance one, but all the power generators and industrial reduced their overall position. So the net position actually represents the number of allowances you would get or give if all your contracts are closed or reach their delivery. And you can see that they overall reduced their net position over the past 2 months. So this means they actually are likely to have brought a bearish pressure on the carbon market and limited the upside potential of prices. So the situation could have been worse than it was. And I think this is the most important chart of the presentation. In the middle, you can see quite clearly the correlation between the variation in net position of the investment funds and the changes in prices. So basically, that means that each time the speculative players wanted to bring the prices up, they increased lightly compared to the other players, such as the emitters, their positions, so they bought allowances, and quite quickly the prices went up. But it also true in the other way, meaning that when they decided to take profit from the recent surge, as you can see mid-February and also mid-March, well, they managed to drive the prices down. However, as I said before, we still had the late compliance players preventing prices from returning to their previous level. And now, before going to our outlook, as you can see on the right chart, and as I said before, the number of financial players, both investment funds and other financial institutions, have risen quite significantly in 2021 with what we believe is all the long-term investors seeing the carbon prices as a one-way bet, meaning that they see prices going only up, with all the European Commission and Union intention to keep an incentive to reduce further their emissions and to increase the 2030 emissions target. And this rising number of financial players actually have consequences for the market, because basically it increases the volatility, exactly as we have seen over the past couple of months, but it also increase or strengthen the correlation with the financial markets, because very often the speculative or new financial players are giving direction to the carbon markets based on the equities and overall macro environment, as we have seen especially in early March. And finally, but it's a bit more far-fetched, if the prices are going way too up and way too quickly, it could threaten the European industry, which will not have the time to reduce their emissions. Okay, so let's go to our outlook. So actually, there's not much change. Currently, the EUA prices remain in their upward trend channel and uncharted territory, meaning there is no real resistance. We believe that currently the speculators are trying to reach the 45 euros per ton level, and we already reached a new record yesterday. So we are really, really near that level. But on the other hand, we actually see a slight bearish risk early May and mid-May due to the compliance deadline. Once it has passed, the market will lose its support from the late compliance player. But also mid-May, we have the UK that will launch its first separate ETS auctions, and all the utilities or industries that so far hedge their needs with EUAs for lack of better products so all the utilities which hedge with EUAs may be pushed to sell back their volumes to buy the equivalent UKA. But this risk is actually rather limited because for now the UK plan to sell only 6 million tons every fortnight. So the volume sold remain limited, and not all the utilities will be able to buy the amount they need. Otherwise, we expect actually the full data of 2020 verified emissions actually tomorrow. And of course, you have your total number of LOSs in circulation calculation coming mid-May. And this will give us the exact number the exact volume the MSR withhold from September. And we actually expect a quite significant volume to be withheld because of the large surplus generated by the crisis in 2021 and the further coal to gas switching observed also last year. So you can prepare for a quite sharp bullish trend at the end of this year. Otherwise, we still expect a strong volatility until June 2021 because no real detail have emerged on the European Commission proposals to review the EU ETS in order to comply with the raised 2030 emissions reduction target, which is actually still in negotiation between the three EU entities. But actually, they are aiming at the April 22nd to close the debate. So we may have a final position on the 55 or 60% new target. And overall, the picture remains bullish, of course, because even if we do not know yet how the EU ETS will be reviewed, it is likely that the supply over the next decade will be strongly reduced, which should push the EUA prices further up. But of course, the slope will depend on the reforms adopted. Okay, so that's it for the carbon prices. I will try to go way quicker for the power prices. So let's first start with maybe the most important fundamental for the power market this year, which is, of course, the nuclear availability. And unfortunately, we expect it to be quite low again this year. So EDF published its nuclear output for 2020, which amounted to 335 terawatt hours, which is a massive decrease, nearly 45 terawatt hours from the previous year. And it gave, as you can see on the chart, the reasons to it. So mainly it's COVID, extended outages, but also due to the Fessenheim unit closure mid-year. But on the other hand, EDF managed to increase its production by postponing several maintenances. I don't know if you remember it, but in last April, and also in April 2021, EDF carried out a massive reorganization or revision of its maintenance schedule and postponed several outages for fuel switching or other reasons to 2021, which of course we will see the impact this year. So we managed to gain 14 terawatt hours doing that. And it's seen, it's quite clearly with a new target for this year, which still is 330 and between 230 and between 360 terawatt hours. But actually, as you can see on the chart, the blue line represents the data, the availability forecast by EDF through the transparency data, and it does not represent this objective, because with it still predicts 400 terawatt hours production. So we expect EDF to correct strongly this forecast. And in reality, we expect the nuclear availability in France over the rest of the years to be quite low, with among the worst years expected in the Q4 and possibly in Q1 2022, which should provide support to the power prices. And finally, RTE extended its security of supply warning for the next 3 winters period due to this low nuclear availability expected. Concerning the spot prices, was actually not much to say here. Basically, we observed quite high prices in 2021, as you can see on the upper right chart in the darker red curve, for several reasons. Of course, you had more expensive gas prices, a higher demand due to lower temperatures. Last year was particularly mild. And we had, of course, the rising CO2 prices. We had also very volatile spot prices due to frequently changing weather patterns. But in terms of demand, we are back in the historical channel. And of course, we are above last year because at that time, so since mid-March, then we implemented a strong lockdown across Europe. And finally, regarding our forward and the outlook for the power markets, so you will not be surprised to hear that the power curve prices tracked the surging emissions and gas prices early February and early March. But what is very interesting is that they observe also a stronger correction from mid-February because of the retreating gas prices, which means that the gas markets still have a hand in the power prices direction. Otherwise, you may have not noticed that recently the German calendar prices have a premium over the French ones, and it actually can be explained through several factors. So, of course, you have the rising, surging even CO2 prices, and as German power mix is way more based on thermal generation than France, it has a stronger impact on it. You have also, and I think it has a stronger impact, the quick and significant coal and nuclear phase-out schedule for Germany over the upcoming years, with nearly 50 gigawatts of capacity scheduled to be removed by 2023. And finally, we think that the power prices in Germany for the summer 2022 are quite overestimated because they present nearly 6 euros per megawatt-hour premium to the French prices. And this possibly have pushed the German prices up too. So this may have participated to this now negative location spread. And finally, but this is very important, we still observe a backwardation also on the long-term power prices. So basically, your prices for 2023 and 2024 are lower than your prices for next year. This is obviously explained by the gas prices, which present the same variations, the same situation. And it's really inconsistent with our view of the fundamentals for this year. Because we expect a strong removal of thermal capacity, would it be nuclear and coal in Germany or nuclear in Belgium, with nearly 2 gigawatts leaving the market by early 2023. So we really expect a correction for these long-term prices. Otherwise, we have a bearish risk for the gas market in the short term, coming from the gas for the power prices coming from the gas market on one side, but also, as I explained before, from the carbon prices. Also, it's actually a bit more uncertain that the carbon prices will correct early May. But otherwise, the pictures remain bullish for the long-term picture, at least remains bullish for the power prices due to the lower capacity expected in the upcoming years, and of course, the rising carbon prices. Okay, so that's all for the power and e-waste. Do you have any question? I don't know, Julien, if you want to start with the question we received by mail or the question of this webinar.
Yeah, yes, Etienne, thanks for the presentation. Before we go to the questions we already received, there is one question regarding e-way prices that came a few times in the chat. It's about the possibility of an intervention of the European Union to put a cap on emission prices to stop the ongoing rally. Is it possible?
It's a very good question that we actually receive quite frequently. So I think this question has been spurred by the rumors, I think it was early February, that the European Commission would intervene and limit the speculation in the EU ETS. But it's actually quite unlikely for several reasons. First, the speculators and all the financial players, not only the speculators, but also the banks and everything, are bringing strong liquidity to the market, necessary also for the emitters. And on the other hand, it would be actually quite difficult. So it would be actually controlling the speculative aspect of the market through the ESMA reports that I showed you before. So they could say that we are limiting the position of the banks or investment funds and everything. But as you've seen, the investment funds have a rather low overall position, small position rather than low. And as for the banks, it would actually be difficult to differentiate the allowances they have for hedging reasons. Would it be for their clients or their own, or for mainly speculative aspects? So we do not expect actually the EU to control the EU prices in the upcoming years.
So yeah, going back to the presentation, we received several questions before the webinar, and an interesting one was the link between power prices and finally the equity market through the EUM prices. So what can you say about that?
Yeah, it was a very interesting question, and quite right actually, because as you can see on the chart, let's say from left to right, the power prices are strongly correlated to the carbon prices, of course, because they are based on it, partly at least. And on the other hand, you have the EUA prices taking strong directions, especially in February and March, yes, on the financial markets. So you can make the link between the power prices on one side and the overall macro environment on the other. And it's actually quite right to see it that way. But I want you to remain very careful because as you can see on the left chart, the EUA take direction also, even if it's connected also to the macro environment, but they also take directions sometimes from the oil markets. And on the other hand, the power prices are also strongly impacted by any change in gas prices. So you could have a change in gas prices, a structural change in the gas market that will strongly impact the power prices. And it will also impact the EUA, but actually much less. And basically, that's what occurred in January. In January, there was not much news regarding the carbon markets, and every directions taken by the power prices, and even the carbon market actually, were given by the gas markets. So you have to remain very careful. Of course, you can follow the macro environment. It will have an impact on the overall power prices, but you have to keep in mind that there are other factors, such as the fuel markets.
Okay, one last question for you, Etienne. How can only 6% of positions held by speculators have such an impact on EUA prices?
That's a very good question. It's actually very hard to explain. Basically, it depends also on the activity of the other players. You can have an overall very large position built over the year. You can roll on with every contact at each delivery. And basically, if you do not have any strong structural change in the market, so if you have a rather muted demand from the large part of the compliance entities, if you do not have much cost-efficient margin on the spot future spread, so basically the banks are not doing anything on their side, that leaves the market to the speculators and all the investment funds, especially. And only due to lack of liquidity, and this actually what we are frequently seeing at the end of the year, basically at the end of December, due to the lack of liquidity, even with a slight change in volumes, you can really have a strong impact on the carbon prices. And I think also it highlights that the speculators currently... So sorry, I just want to go through that also. Go on. I think also the speculators are taking advantage of the uncertainty related to the carbon market until June 2021 with the legislative proposal. Basically, most of the participants don't know how exactly will evolve the carbon prices besides going up. And I think the speculators are taking advantage of this, of the uncertainty, to drive the carbon prices in one direction or the other, despite the low volumes they present.
Okay, thanks a lot, Etienne, for your answers. So before we close this webinar session, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to ask you to answer a short survey, a short satisfaction survey about the webinar. It's really important for us. Thanks a lot for your questions in the chat room. We'll answer all the questions that were not taken during the presentation by email. Regarding EnergyScan news, please note that we'll publish an update of our 5-year price forecast. But by early May, you will also receive an invitation in the coming weeks for our global satisfaction survey. And our next webinar session will take place in July 21. So I will give you just 20 seconds to fill the survey. Thank you to those who answered. Okay, thanks. I'm going to close this survey and close the webinar session. So it's now time for me to say goodbye. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I'll see you soon on EnergyScan. Goodbye.